In Frances Ha, Greta Gerwig plays a struggling dancer in New York City who must contend with everyone around her moving on to bigger and better things. It's really a coming-of-age drama that just happens to star the future director of Barbie. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David Ha.
Undateable.
Thank you. Yes, welcome everyone. This is a movie podcast. We're currently still in dance movie season, although we're coming up on the end of it. This is the penultimate episode. Next week is the season finale, if you will. But today we're doing our second vote winner of the season. We did a vote between 3 dance movies, and the others were a bit more conventional. But why are you making a face?
I don't think this one won the vote.
Was it not?
Bring It On won the vote. Frances Ha.
Oh, you're right. This wasn't a vote.
We originally had this structured for a much later vote for a Criterion cut.
That's what I'm thinking of. That's what I'm thinking of. This wasn't a vote. I just picked this one. Never mind then. We're here. We're doing Frances Ha, the movie, directed by Noah Baumbach, starring Greta Gerwig, who are, I don't know if they were married at the time, but they've been married since, I believe. Okay. But they co-wrote this together. He directed this. I believe he wrote Barbie with her, and I don't know if he worked on Lady Bird, but he might have done, because they seem like they're collaborating a lot throughout their careers. So we'll get into it. This is a little bit different from a lot of the kind of more poppy 80s dance movies that we have mostly been covering. Obviously, there's been a couple of exceptions, but this is actually a movie that's in the Criterion collection. So yeah, you know, a bit of a classier film with a bit more of a indie drama kind of feel.
Hold on, are you telling me that Bring It On is not the indie drama darling of the year 2000 and I think it was just 2000 flat?
I think it was, yeah. 2000.
Okay, are you telling me that?
I'm pretty sure I'm telling you that, yes.
All right. Well, that seems wrong to me, but I guess.
I'd have to go back and check, but I've got a funny feeling there's like an Alexander Payne movie or something that probably takes that prize. But yes. Oh, yes. So, we'll start spoiler-free, of course, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we get to spoilers later. Before we get started, I'll just remind you, if you're enjoying the show on YouTube, please do hit the like button. It helps us out a bunch if you do. And, of course, you can support the content and get some bonus shows that me and David do over on Patreon, but I'll tell you more about them at the end of the show. So Frances Ha is a movie about a 27-year-old who is an apprentice at a dance company, and she lives with her best friend in an apartment in New York, but her life keeps kind of falling apart, I'll say, in a broad sense. And sadly, like these types of movies, like, almost get to me a bit much, because this is someone who's awkward with people, who's unsuccessful, and I'm like, I relate far too much to this character and how she's failing to be a proper adult. Like, there's something just so relatable about this character that upsets me. But that's what the movie is.
Yeah, I fully understand that. I would say I have a few attachments to this character, a few relations that I get with them. But what was getting me the most is I have a friend. I'm not going to name names, but I have a friend who is exactly like Greta Gerwig's character. Exactly like Frances. Like, just straight up is like constantly having something going on with like their life falling apart, is constantly moving to like new locations. And I'm just like watching this movie and I'm just like wanting to text this person being like, hey, you might have grounds to sue.
Yeah, it's one of those movies where you get kind of anxiety at times because the social interaction she's in, and sometimes it's her fault. Like, Frances gets herself into some trouble with like not wanting to admit certain things or whatever. But other times it is just kind of like, nah, she's just like, everyone else is kind of being a dick because they've got these expectations that everyone should be a certain way, and she's not quite slotting into that, and it's creating a rift. But so sometimes it's her fault, sometimes it's not, and I think that makes it also kind of relatable in a weird way, because like, yeah, like, it's not everything's on the person necessarily, but yeah, so, you know, it's a movie full of social anxiety, and that's not to say that it's not got some humor, and there's a couple of funny moments, and, you know, I'd say there's a lot of amusing things, but there's a couple of proper like laugh out loud funny moments. I'll point out the one that really got me as we get into it. But David, what did you think of Frances Ha?
I liked it. I really did like it. But
Actually,
as I'm
just before we get any further, she's a dancer. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's why it's in dance season.
Yeah.
Just in case that wasn't clear.
You said she was an apprentice dancer.
That's right. Yes.
But no, I did really like this. But the issue that I had coming out of it was I don't know why I liked it. Like, I was sitting there, I was thinking on it, I was trying to figure out what was it in this movie that I felt really, like, resonated with me, that I was able to, like, because essentially is just a coming-of-age movie. If you really boil it down to its core components, it's someone who, like, doesn't have their life together, things get slightly worse, and then by the end of the movie, coming of age. So I can see the bare bones of it. It has a good structure, but it does it in such an, like, unconventional way. It does it in a way that, I mean, narrative sense-wise, doesn't really flow in any meaningful way. I think that it's kind of just sort of a collection of, like, scenes, and the only flow between it is Frances and her friend Sophie, and you get the feeling of, like, their relationship over time. But I mean, we'll get into all that. Long story short, I really do like it, and I'm hoping that over the course of this conversation I can pin down exactly what it is that I like about it.
I mean, I don't think it's that confusing, like, question you're asking me here. I think it's a good movie. It's a good drama with characters that are layered, with a character that you get so, like, you get to know her so well that you start to notice, like, her quirks or her defenses, or when she puts up certain walls, or when she makes the same mistakes over and over again, and you hope for a different outcome, and you're hoping it'll happen by the end of the movie. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but I think, if nothing else, it follows some fundamental rules, which is that it sets things up that by the end of the movie, it does pay off. There's payoffs in the last, like, 10 minutes of this movie that feel like, okay, a lot of this film was seeding a lot of these moments and whatnot. But I think more than anything else, it's just good direction, good acting, and good writing. So just to complement the writer duo, acting director duo of Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach. But that's kind of what it all boils down to. It's just they're really good at capturing kind of natural-esque conversations. They feel a bit cinematic in like an indie movie kind of way, but not in like a big blockbuster kind of way. They feel a bit more down to earth. There's definitely some quirks there. There's like a lot of sex talk in this movie, which is whatever. But the one thing that really felt like it was recurring a lot in the first half was, like, multiple characters either refer to someone else or themselves as only being able to finish in certain ways. And I was like, this is a weird, like, recurring like through line that's going on here. But
It kind of reminded me of Aaron Sorkin writing at times, where it's much more naturalistic. It's not as snappy as Sorkin writing, but everyone, like, the flow of the conversation is so fast paced, and it's so just like boom, 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 that it makes it feel like, because there was a script behind this, that's kind of the style of writing they were going for.
Yeah, it's a very talky movie for sure. Like, I mean, there's definitely moments where she's on her own where there's no dialogue, but whenever she's in a scene with someone else, they never shut up. Like, it's very back and forth. And that's not a complaint. It's just what it is. But
I mean, honestly, they use that to their benefit, is that most of the movie is so back and forth that whenever there is a lull in the conversation or there's, like, a sudden silence, it hits you. You understand that that's a moment. Yeah,
you feel it. And again, I think it's just a really well-structured movie. As much as it seems like a collection of scenes, like you said, like, the opening is about showing, how happy she is in this current situation, this status quo. But a big theme of the movie is that these status quos that she's in are not permanent, and these other characters are going to grow out of this kind of, younger person lifestyle that she's kind of attached to, and she feels sort of betrayed by that at certain points. And that, so I think the opening with this perfect day with her best friend, with them dancing in the park together and play fighting, and which doesn't even say we're talking about 20-somethings. It sounds like we're talking about 12-year-olds. But that's very much what it is.
I think that's the main, like, core theme of the movie, though, is that we open up with her, like you said, not a care in the world. And a recurring thing that keeps on coming up in this movie is her mentioning her age, or, like, other people mentioning how old she looks or something like that. And she keeps on trying to play it as, oh, well, it's not that old. Like, she doesn't want to grow up. She doesn't want to take on the adult responsibilities and such. It's not a thing of she's incapable of doing so. to an extent she is, but she also just doesn't want to. She wants to stay in this happy-go-lucky, like, early 20s phase for the rest of her life.
Yeah, and people around her are moving on, and there's these little like branches that are like sort of put out to her throughout the movie that you're kind of hoping she'll take one, and she keeps kind of knocking them away. And that's where I'm saying it. Sometimes it is kind of her own fault. She ends up in certain situations, but at the same time, people are kind of weird about how they kind of drift from her at times without like giving her like. There's so many points in this movie where I'm like, you know what? If one of her friends just actually had a conversation with her about what's going on, it would probably. I mean, maybe she'd overreact and she'd get mad about it, and it would cause a reaction. But at the very least, it would bring up the subject, so she'd be thinking about it, and maybe she'd get to a decision or a moment of maturity or whatever a little bit sooner. So yeah.
I also think this movie does a fantastic job of playing up this idea that we only ever see people doing their best, if that makes sense. Like, it's only ever all the people she talks to and all the people that are doing stuff, she keeps on saying like, oh yeah, he's doing this, he's doing that, they're going to Paris, they're going to Japan, they're doing these amazing things with their life. And meanwhile, we're in Greta's shoes, seeing how she's just unable to get a handle on any of that. And it's only much later in the movie that we finally get that breaking down of, no, everybody has this sort of stuff going on. It's that we only ever see what they're outwardly showing to us.
Yeah, I think a big theme of this movie is not willing to admit that things aren't okay. That is a constant thing here. Whenever anyone says to Greta, yeah, things are great and we're doing this and we're doing that, and they're like, okay, how's it going for you? She always starts being, oh yeah, things are great. Like, it's like, they're not. You're a mess, and you're maybe going to be homeless, and you're just kind of dancing around these questions, and you're refusing to accept help from anyone, or even letting anyone know you need help. Is I guess really what it is, more than refusing to accept help. It's the admitting that you even need it in the first place. So yeah, I mean, I think it's got strong themes. I think it's got strong characters, and I think it's well directed. It is very much, you know, and there's a little bit of quirkiness to it, but not like a super amount. It's kind of interesting because obviously it's black and white, which we've not mentioned yet. Yes. But it's a movie from 2012. But it does almost trick you, because I think in my head when I was starting it, I was like, oh, this must be like. I was thinking more like 2002, which obviously doesn't make sense with the age of like Greta Gerwig as a person, but just in my head, I was just sort of thinking, oh, this must be like 2002. This is like a turn of the century movie, and they're doing some artsy black and white. And obviously, movies were in color at that time period. I remember it, I was alive, but something about it being black and white just makes it feel a bit older than it is. And there's at one point someone gets a notification, and it's clearly a smartphone, and I went, oh, wait a minute, this isn't like that far back. It's only 2012. Okay. All right.
Yeah, there was a scene where Greta is talking to her friend, and she says like, "Oh, you're always so involved in your phone that gets emails." And like, as soon as that line was said, I was like, I recognize this is 2012, but that line puts it at like BlackBerry time of like 2003, and I just don't know anymore.
No, I think that makes sense to me. This idea that she can't afford a smartphone. So, like, she's kind of like, so most people had smartphones by 2012. They came out originally in 2008. So I can kind of buy that she being poor and struggling to pay rent is maybe just still on an older style of phone. And that's just how it is. But
yeah, it was just the way that she referenced it of saying your phone that can do email. That's like when the iPhone first came out, saying like your phone that can play your music.
Well, I think that plays into what you were saying, though, is that she wants to be 21 still, and when she was 21, that was around that time.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So she's still not moved on in that sense. So yeah. As far as there's a young Adam Driver in here as well. We'll mention that.
Yeah, that surprised me. I mean, the rest of the cast is pretty much, I wouldn't say nobodies, but I didn't recognize anybody, I will say. But Adam Driver just showed up, and I'm like, oh. Hey there, what are you doing here?
Yeah, there's one more person I recognized, and that's Grace Gummer, who was one of the dancers at the dance company. She was in Mr. Robot, which is why I recognized her instantly.
Oh, that's right. I thought she looked kind of familiar, but I thought she just had one of those faces. Okay, I remember her now.
Yeah. She popped up. I was like, oh, it's her. It's funny because, like I say, it's not that old, but like these actors that I'm recognizing in this, you know, they only became big maybe like, you know, 4 or 5 years after this, so they're slightly younger, they're slightly more baby-faced than any other time I've seen them. You know, because Adam Driver's, you know, he's clean-shaven here, he's got shorter hair. This is what, 3 years before Star Wars Force Awakens came out, and kind of introduced most people to him. Not everyone, but most people.
I was gonna say I can't think of the average person knowing any of Adam Driver's previous stuff before that.
Yeah, and of course he'd gone to work with Baumbach again because a Marriage Story was kind of was a big release for him. He did another movie in 2022 called White Noise. I've not seen either of those. For some reason, I never get around to seeing Marriage Story. I really need to. The Baumbach movies I've seen before. I saw The Squid and the Whale a long time ago, back in the DVD days. That was like one of his mid-2000s movies. I saw that, and I also saw Greenberg with Ben Stiller, and I saw that in the cinema, and I remember that being a little disappointing, because I like Squid and the Whale, and I thought Greenberg just wasn't as good. This feels more like... I mean, it's been too long since Squid and the Whale to compare this to that, to be honest. I don't remember it that well now. But this feels more like what I remember feeling about Squid and the Whale was like, oh, it's an interesting drama with kind of an eccentric character. In that movie's case, it was like a family, and like the dad, who I think was Jeff Daniels. He was like this like guy, like this. I thought it was like a professor or a novel writer, but he had his like teenage son, like he was this awkward kid who, whenever anyone said they would read something, he'd like get really like an internet dude being like, oh, well, that's fine, but I really prefer the works of so-and-so from this time period. Yeah, it's like that kind of, you know, pompous kind of attitude.
Honestly, this movie kind of had aspects of that as well. It never played it up in like a purposely pompous way, but there were just a few things where Greta is constantly talking about, I keep saying Greta, Frances keeps talking about it, like, oh, I'm the one who reads. I was reading Walden the other day, and I'm like, okay, good for you. You did that.
Yeah, I mean, they even joke in the movie that, you know, like, most of the people she meets are artists living in New York, meaning they come from rich families because artists can't afford to live in New York unless they're already successful.
I'm just looking at Baumbach's stuff. I don't think I've seen anything he directed, but in terms of writing credits, I've seen Madagascar 3.
He wrote Madagascar 3? I did not know that. That's
co-written with Eric Darnell, and it was good. It was honestly a solid film all on its own, so I'll give that credit. That's
very interesting. Obviously, I think he's written or co-written like all the ones he's directed, and then Mistress America. I've heard of that. I've not seen it though.
Well, it's another one with Greta Gerwig, so maybe we're checking out.
Yeah. Oh, he wrote Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. He did a what's his face movie?
I'm not sure. Oh, there it is. Yeah. What is it? Wes Anderson.
Wes Anderson, that's the name I'm looking for. Yeah. I remember liking that. So yeah, I mean, he's obviously a director worth watching. I don't think necessarily, like I say, I think it put me off because Greenberg was such a kind of lukewarm movie for me, but clearly the dude has it, and everyone was raving about Marriage Story. Like, and again, that's a movie about a drama, two characters, about marriage breaking down and kind of all the interpersonal stuff, and this is very much interpersonal stuff for this character. So
that's again, not having seen any of Baumbach's stuff, just knowing Marriage Story's reputation, and then also seeing this, I feel like he really understands how to show the aspects of human life that just isn't something we tend to deal with. It's not something we tend to show on screen and say, hey, everybody, let's deal with this highly uncomfortable thing.
Yeah. So very talented at that, and I think this movie is a good example of it. So, is there anything you'd like to get into before we hit spoilers?
Only two things. The first, which we always hit right before spoilers, is the soundtrack of this movie, which I'll also say score, but they do a lot of... I don't want to say, like, indie hits, because some of it's David Bowie, and obviously Bowie's pretty popular overall, but, like, it seems like it's specifically the iPod of someone who would say, I only go to indie shows, you know?
It's about hipster is what you're trying to tell me.
Yeah, there's the word. I think that listening to this, it wasn't a bad soundtrack. I think all the songs worked well for the mood they were going for in each of the scenes, but it was definitely, as I was listening to it, like, yeah, you purposely avoided as many like pop hits as possible, I'm sure.
It's also a low-budget movie, so I wonder like how much choice it had for bigger songs anyway. I was even surprised that I recognized one or two of them, because I felt like, you're probably using like really small things because it's cheaper.
Yeah, that's true. Second thing, and this one just like really weirded me out. I told you already that I had a friend who I just 100% associate with Frances. Sophie, she is at one point in this movie, they say what her job was. Not only is that the same industry that I work in, it's the same company, which just like really weirded me out for a second.
Yeah, but she quit, so she's not there anymore. She was gone long before you started.
But see, now I'm wondering what's ahead in my life.
Tokyo.
Yeah, I guess so.
Oh god, we're gonna have to record at really weird times if you end up in Tokyo.
Oh yeah. All right, it's 11 a.m. Are you ready, Pete? Now with your 11 p.m. time.
Ah, son of a bitch! Don't make me do it. So yeah, spoilers. Then we'll get into the spoilers. But I think needless to say, we're both being quite positive on this. And admittedly, we've not talked much about dancing, and it is dance movie season, so we should probably maybe hit in that before we get into the rest of the thing. It's funny because like the movie started, and I'm like, okay, this doesn't feel super dance centric, and then there's some scenes where they're at her, class where she's like teaching, and she's doing stuff, and it kind of like the dancing in this is more, it's like that's what she happens to want to do with her life, and she has certain aspirations about it. But it's not so much that the dancing is the focus in terms, the character drama is the focus. The dancing is just kind of like you could literally give her almost any other like industry, and it would work just the same. Especially a creative industry. You could say that she wanted to be an actor. You could say she wanted to be a singer. You could say any of these things, and the plot would function pretty much the exact same. That said, though, there is one really cool scene where she's running through the city. And every time she's going across the crosswalk, she starts doing like sort of dance spins, and it's to the music that's playing. And it was a really cool looking scene. It was very different and gave it a very different perspective and energy that I'm used to. Yeah, no,
I definitely took note of that scene as well. It was definitely something that was very well done there. I do like that you put a little accent though on it can be replaced with any other job, which it can, but it has to be one of those creative jobs because I think that in a creative job, it's one of those things where you might be able to squeeze out an earnest living. You might be able to get a paycheck enough to cover a job or something like that. But to actually make it, to actually like be able to afford a New York apartment or something like that is very rare. It's something that very few people are ever really going to be able to do. And I think that's kind of one of the larger themes in this movie, as we said, is that she doesn't want to grow up and deal with the realism of that. She wants to stay in this idea of like, no, I'm going to dance and I'm going to make it big and I'm going to be able to do this stuff.
Yeah, and unfortunately for her, dancing when you're like, we said she's 27 and she's not made it yet. And dancing's kind of like an athlete, it's kind of a younger, like if you're going to make it, you're going to make it probably by the time you're 22. Not.
There's one scene in this movie that just breaks my heart, and that is where she has her meeting with the leader of the dance company. And I mean, I won't spoil it too much, but it's essentially just that she thinks she's going there for like a promotion essentially, and the dance company's just like, so why are you still here? Like, why are you like not moving on onto like bigger things outside the company? Basically just striking down her dreams right there.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's really hopeful throughout the movie about certain things, and she's like sure she's about to do something or get something, and then it'll be pulled away from her. And it's mostly her fault that she assumed certain things, but it is a little soul-crushing every single time.
Because this movie really gets you into her mindset. Like, it's not a thing where we see her do something and we, like, chide her when she messes up. We feel bad for her when she messes up. We understand.
Yeah, like, I mean, she's naive, but you don't blame her for it necessarily. You sort of get in her headspace and understand how she's thinking about things, and she doesn't want to accept certain things. And yeah, she does have to grow up, but she's always sympathetic. It's never, she's never a villain to the audience, certainly. So, yeah, spoilers then for Frances Ha. You have been warned. We're going to get into it. Like I said, the movie opens with her having kind of a perfect day with her roommate, and even like everything up until them like being in bed that night, and like they ended up sleeping in the same bed, which seems to be a normal thing that they do on a lot of time, because they'll just be talking, they'll just sort of doze off and whatever. And they even do kind of this like I feel like usually when I see this in a movie, it's usually kids that are doing it, but and obviously this fits into the themes, but Frances turns to Sophie and says, when they're lying in bed, hey, can you tell us the story of us? And it's basically just like this list of things they're going to do when they're older. And it's like, oh, we're going to, like, I'm going to be a successful publisher. You're going to be a successful dancer. And we're going to have our own apartments. And we're going to be spinsters. And, like, the boys will want us, but we won't be with them. And it's very much like this fantasy of a, and it's clearly, like, just kind of a jokey thing, maybe, overall. But you can sort of tell that in some ways Frances was attached to the idea of just that being the future.
No, absolutely. She loves the ideas that are being spit out there. She sees it as the exact goal she wants to aim for in life.
Absolutely. So, so that really sets all that up. And very quickly, there's a scene where she's with, and I almost forgot about this because it's such a small part at the start of the movie. But she had a boyfriend. Frances, like, is in a scene with this guy. And he's showing her pictures of these cats that he wants to get. And he's like, look, it's, you know, $100 for this cat, $80 for this cat. This is a great idea. And I want them to be our cats. And she's like, what, you're going to, like, take them to, like, between two apartments? And he's like, no, I was thinking you could move in here with me. And she's like, oh, that's great. But I can. And she basically goes on this little line of reasoning that, because she's promised Sophie, her best friend, that she'll be there until the end of the lease, and they think that they're going to renew the lease, or at least Frances thinks that anyway, that she can't, like, just ditch her, because she feels that she'd be ditching her friend. And the boyfriend, well, he doesn't seem like a particularly great guy. He does make the quite poignant statement, which is very true for the rest of this movie, which is like, no, you can, you just don't want to.
Yeah, I think this sequence, as you're watching it, you're kind of trying to figure out, okay, what relevance does this play? But looking back on it, this is a perfect little capsule of her mindset at the beginning of, she is being told, here are two tiny little things that you're going to have to care for years, and also you're taking the next step in your relationship with this guy and moving in with him. These are very grown-up things to do. And immediately she just revolts against that. She's just like, nope. Don't want any part of that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and it's kind of awkward. She's not, like, mean about it. She's very apologetic, but ultimately she's making that choice. And he says, oh, maybe this isn't working. And then she goes, well, you still want to get the cats? Because then you're a single guy with two cats, which, I mean, first of all, what's wrong with that?
I was going to say, I was a single guy with two cats, and I'm a taken guy with two cats. So, yeah.
Girlfriends come and go. Cats are forever.
Cats are about 12 to 15 years, but all right.
No, I mean, it's probably 15 to 20.
All right. Fair enough. Maybe that's across the seas. We've got shorter-lived cats.
I've definitely met cats that are like 20 years old.
Look, I'm fine with my cats living to be 100, but
yeah. Anyways, regardless, and she's like, Ben will be a single guy, and he's like, wait, why would I be single? And I'm like, didn't you just break up with her by saying that this isn't working? And that's the point she makes. And it definitely presents that, okay, well, he is got his problems, clearly. They imply in that scene after this that he's an alcoholic, and they also, obviously, he's very awkward in the scene with how he communicates a lot of this information. It doesn't change the fact that there's nuggets of truth in, like, what he's saying back at her. And she leaves here. In fact, actually, she gets a phone call when she's with him, and it's Sophie. And actually, this is probably the first time in the movie where I, like, really loved her performance, because the way she lit up when she answered the phone, she's like, "Hey, girlfriend," and she's doing, like, this funny voice, and she's like, "What's up?" And Sophie's, like, drunk, and she's, like, with, like, guys at a party, and she's, like, inviting her over. And Frances says she's just going to go, but she ends up going to the party and hanging out, and Adam Driver's one of the guys that's there, and they kind of talk a little bit. And then she goes back with Sophie, you know, back to their apartment later that night, and Adam Driver's asked for her number, which she's like, yeah, give it to him, and so it all plays out, right? But the key things here, though, is that she was offered to move in with a boyfriend, start kind of a new chapter of her life, and she turned it down because, well, I can't do that to Sophie. Which is why what happens next really hits hard, which is that it turns out that Sophie wants to move out because she's always wanted to live in this other part of the city, and she's got a friend who's got an opening to move in with. The lease is up in 2 months. She wants to go, and, like, Frances has to sit there and kind of, like, take this, and she, you know, has to pretend not to be heartbroken by it. But we know that she just, like, completely ditched her boyfriend, and at least the excuse she gave was that she couldn't do this to Sophie. And I do think part of this movie, well, it is obviously about Frances growing up. I do think there is this sense of like attachment to Sophie, which is a big part of it as well.
Absolutely. There's a speech she gives in the middle at a dinner, which we'll get to, but I think that speech is 200% about Sophie, especially as this movie ends.
Absolutely, yeah. So that like sets stuff up, and it's like, okay, and the movie like cuts ahead quite quickly here to where Frances is on her own in the apartment, and there's just like books stacked up in the corner because clearly the bookshelves belong to Sophie, so they're all gone. And she's yelling on the phone that the kettle's gone, and she's like, no, that was our kettle, we bought that together, get me a new kettle. And she's clearly struggling to pay for things. She can't stay here when the lease is up because she can't afford to be here on her own. This is like a whole thing, and it's only just because she gets a check, she gets a tax rebate in the mail, which lends her to like asking Adam Driver out for dinner.
Could I just say how much I love the tax rebate scene? Where, like, you could tell just exactly how poor she is by the fact that she opens up this check, sees that it says U.S. Treasury, and then they, like, smash cut to her leaving a bank, and there's, like, this triumphant music playing. She's just like, I did it. I've got money.
This felt like artistic, like, choice. But this idea that like, she's so happy with a little bit of money coming in just paints a picture of, like, how struggling she really is.
But then it also doubles immediately back over to showing exactly how impulsive and irresponsible she is with it as well.
Oh, she's like, yeah, let's just go out and have a nice meal. I got some money, right? Let's not use that money for anything important. Let's go have
like
a meal.
Rent.
And the funny thing is, she goes out with Adam Driver, and I'm sure I've skipped some dance. We'll talk about all the dance stuff kind of on its own thread later because it's kind of all fits together. But she goes out with Adam Driver, and it's clear that they have no chemistry, right? Every subject he brings up, she's like, no, I don't really care about basketball. And he's like, yeah, this is a photo of me with Jay Leno. And she's like, he's kind of a dick. Yeah, but you have to love him though, right? He's like, not really. Like, it's kind of this like thing, but she's determined that she's going to pay because she asked him out. And we didn't really know this yet, but we kind of find out he's from a rich family like later on, and that's kind of why he can do what he does. But she makes this big song and dance, and the restaurant won't accept her debit card. It only accepts credit cards.
Well, they run her credit card, it fails, and then she's like, do you accept debit? And she's like, no, cash or credit.
I have never been anywhere that doesn't accept a debit card.
I can't imagine it either. It seems like a card's a card, but maybe this is some different alternate world where that's just a thing.
Maybe it's just nice restaurants in the big city. Maybe are a bit more fussy about it. I don't know.
I mean, if anything, credit cards always charge like a small fee in order just to even use them. Debit cards are just a direct. So I don't know why they wouldn't accept a debit card.
Also, debit cards take the money directly from money that is there, whereas credit, like, admittedly, the restaurant won't be the ones to have to, like, face the consequences if like, later on the person can't pay their bill. But, like, with a debit card, no, the money's is there, it's paid for, and it's done. Like, there's no after the fact to it, but regardless.
And a person could always do a chargeback on a credit card as well, so...
Yeah.
This is a stupid restaurant, is I guess what we're saying.
But at least to this scene where she's like, no, I'm going to go get cash out the machine, even though he's offering to pay, and we get this ridiculous sequence where she's running throughout the streets in New York, and I have to imagine, ATMs must be more, like, frequent than this, because she is struggling to find one.
I mean, I don't know where she's at. I went to New York maybe like 6 months ago. I wasn't on the lookout for ATMs, but yes, I feel like I saw them more than she was running around there, especially because as she leaves the restaurant, it's super busy and like everyone's enjoying meals. And as she finally gets back, it's totally empty and everyone's packed up for the night. So she has been gone for at least like half an hour, 45 minutes.
She even falls on the way back as well. So which adds a bit of, again, like the choices of like the mood of the scene, the music, the way it's paced, and the just the humor of her running the way she is through the streets all adds a little bit of a light comedy charm to everything, even when it has been a little bit awkward.
Yeah.
Which I think goes a long way to make her likable. Although, one of the most relatable things as well is when she goes to get cash out the machine, and there's like, oh, this is a $3 charge for taking money out here, and just the way her head slumps forward, like, son of a bitch. Like,
I took that as am I really gonna? Is this worth it? I could find another machine. I could keep going.
But it's such an insult, though. Like, there's no reason why it shouldn't be free. Piss off. Like,
yeah, no,
like,
absolutely.
Just piss off. And it's always in the most convenient locations are the ones that charge because they know it's convenient. They know that they've got you here because it's right outside the train station or the airport or something. It's like, so these are the ones that are going to charge you for the, just taking money, your money.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm so happy my current place that I live is like half a mile away from my bank. So I don't have to, if I need cash, right there. No charge.
Annoyingly, I have an ATM really close to me, but it does charge.
So Patreon, everybody.
Oh yeah, I mean, the running, like, subtext this entire review when I'm talking about this character struggling and, like, not being successful, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV.
For as low as $5, you can get extra videos or whatever.
As low as $3 even. You'll get all of them, but you'll get some of them.
For as low as $10.
Yeah, if you're rich, by all means. I mean, I'm not saying I want a boat, but if you give me the price of a boat, I'm not going to say no. Hey, I'm in Scotland. There's water nearby, relatively speaking.
I know where you are in Scotland. You're not near that, well, close to water.
Relatively, it's not that long to get to water. It's like a 30-minute train ride.
Where are you going to hook a boat to a train ride?
The boats stay in the harbour, obviously, you pillock. I'm not saying I'll have the boat at the house.
See, that's more impressive to me. I would love to see that.
Oh, I'm going to be these assholes who has a boat attached to the back of the car on a trolley.
Yep.
Just so they can go through the street going, hey, look at everyone, I've got a boat. See me? Yep. I'm the guy with a boat.
That's what you should name the boat. See me, I'm the guy with the boat.
Yes. Any seaman for my see me?
All right, well, maybe don't name it that.
See, there you go. I'm following your plan. Anyway, she gets back and she pays for the thing. They go back to his place and she's like, oh, this is a great apartment, blah, blah, blah. And he says, do you want to see my room? And later on, every other girl we see him with in his apartment, that seems to imply that he takes the girl back for sex. And it doesn't seem to happen with her, though. It seems to be like, no, it just kind of fizzles out. And she ends up chatting with his roommate. And then eventually, when she's awkwardly trying to leave the next day, but clearly doesn't want to, right? Which also is a running thing of this movie, is that she says she's terrible at leaving places. She's always the last one to leave, which kind of ties into this idea of not wanting things to change. Like, I don't know, I'm not ready for this to be over, kind of thing.
She gets comfortable and she's like, I'm just going to be here for a while.
But it does this, smash cut, because we didn't mention this earlier, but earlier on in the film, like, there's a title card, which is the address that she's living at. And we get another one here, so we get one every time she moves. So she actually becomes the third roommate with these two guys.
Yeah, so as she's crashing for the night, one of them specifically says, hey, we have a girl who, like, lives here, but she's crashing here for a while, and she's moving to Portland soon. And so she basically takes this as her in of, like, well, if you're losing someone, and I need to move in, I can pay a part of rent, kind of, a little, tiny bit.
Yeah, but there's a great awkward little moment where there's like a slight, like, Adam Driver forgets the amount they said she could pay, and she gets really, like, stressed really quickly. But, like, oh, remember you said that I could pay $950 because or whatever? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, I love that the struggling person in New York has to pay $950 for a third of rent. These are insane prices to me. But
and that was back in. Here's the thing: you got to remember that was back in 2012.
That's true.
That's like modern anywhere else in the U.S. right now is at that price.
Yeah, and I suppose once I convert to pounds, it's not that ridiculous a number, but it's, like, I think like an apartment on its own should cost about that rent.
It's like £800 right now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's not that ridiculous. I mean, it's more than I would like to pay, but I definitely see places for that amount for sure. But anyway, what was the same? Yeah, so she's moved in. And one of the things that kind of stirs up with this sort of section of the movie is she actually gets really good friends with the roommate, whose name is Benji. Yeah. Yep. And he's got this thing where he keeps saying undateable whenever she says something dorky, and they seem to have some chemistry. And there's even a moment a little bit into this where he brings up with her, hey, Adam Driver said, obviously that's not how he phrased it, but Adam Driver said that he thinks we're going to end up being married. And they kind of just both laugh it off, but it does feel like the movie's saying, hey, these two are actually kind of perfect for each other, and maybe they should think about dating each other. But it's kind of like he actually is a bit younger, right? And that's kind of clear because there's like an awkward conversation. One of their breakfast scenes where Adam Driver's got a girl that he spent the night with who he just met yesterday, and they're just talking about stuff, and like the girl's talking to her because she's heard of Sophie, so she kind of knows who she is.
She's like tangential to the friend group, and they just never have actually met each other.
And she's like, "You look kind of old," and she's like, "What? I'm 27." It's like, "Yeah, but you look older than that." And she's like, "Huh?" And
I'm like an old face.
And I'm like, is there any part of you that doesn't think this is rude? Just any part of you. Like, this is not done, typically.
I mean, yes, it seems rude in general, but I think it was supposed to come off more as the idea of, like, you know, trying to say that she just seems, you know, more mature, something like that. But obviously, because we're in Frances's shoes here, she doesn't want that. She wants to be young.
Oh, she gets defensive at one point. Yeah. Someone says, "Oh, I think it's later on when she's back at the college like campus and she's doing the thing." But the girl who's there, who's like a college student, says, "Oh, you're so like responsible," and she's like, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Don't say that about me.
How dare you?
How dare you say such a thing?"
Yeah. One thing that I did really like in this sequence, though, with the roommates and all that, is that Benji, he is a struggling screenwriter, and he has, and I think this is why they are played off as a good couple, he has the exact same thing as Frances here. Like, he says, like, "Oh yeah, I'm writing these spec scripts and I have a chance at like writing for SNL." And it's like, no, you don't, dude. There's no way you do. But go on, keep dreaming the dream.
But he thinks he does. Just like she thinks she's going to get promoted and be like a regular like main dancer in the company and tour and get paid more. He thinks he's going to be a writer, and then eventually he's like, no, the SNL thing didn't work out because it's a scene where they're talking about, "Oh, isn't it funny he said we'd end up being married." They clearly have good chemistry. They bounce backwards and forwards quite well, and he mentions that he's writing a screenplay for Gremlins 3.
Yeah,
really specific.
I thought you would get a kick out of that one.
I got amused. It wasn't as funny as later on, though, when she's in Paris, and there's like a smash cut to her at the front of a movie theater, and it's like a 3-second scene where she just says, "What time did Puss in Boots start?" And then it cuts to the next scene, and that really made me laugh.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, this entire segment, again, is like her clinging, because it's clear that these two are more college age, or closer to college age that she's living with, and this is like, seems like she's trying to fit in with this group. And the only reason why Benji's getting away with it more than she is one, maybe because he's a bit younger, but also because he's got rich parents. You know, he even says, "Oh, I got a loan from my dad to just cover my costs for a while." And
I love how he phrases that. He's like, "Oh, I finally caved and I took a loan from my dad. That bastard."
I finally caved, yep. And it's all thing, but so this is probably a good time to bring in the actual dance company stuff, because the reason why she has to move out of here is because the whole dance thing falls apart. We see. She works here with she's just as like an understudy or whatnot. We see her working and just doing all the dance routines. But she also teaches the kids dancing as well. That's one of her like other roles.
Yeah, like some ballet stuff. And when she's trying to talk to the like head person, the like main choreographer, she's like, "Hey, can I take on more jobs? Can I like do something else? I could really use some extra money." But she's like, "No, sorry, I think we're all filled up here. Nothing we can do." But you know, she keeps on working as the understudy. But then,
well, and also the lady also says, "Hey, but at least you'll probably get to be a part of the Christmas thing, which we do every year,
exactly,
and that'll be a bit extra money."
And that's what she was looking forward to. She was telling them like, "Hey, I'm paying this reduced rent amount up until the Christmas show, because then I'll be doing like 10 shows, I'll be making a ton of money, and then I could start really paying the stuff." So it's at this point roundabout here where she's just hanging out after one of the shows, and she's approached by this woman, and the woman's like, "Hey, I want to tell you in person, we're not going to need you for the Christmas show. Like, your role will not be here, so we're not going to use you." And she takes it on the chin, like she's like, "All right, so be it, that's fine, whatever." But like, you could tell this is devastating to her.
Yeah,
like, she is upset that this happened.
I think the performance here from Greta Gerwig is very good, because it, like you said, she is nice about it, doesn't make a scene, acts like it's okay, but you can see it. You can see how much this actually just destroyed her, and you know this has implications for where she's living right now. And I actually thought, because it cuts quite quickly after this to her going to Sacramento in California.
Yeah.
And it turns out to just be for Christmas, but I actually thought she was just moving home. I thought, like, okay, I have to just go home and live with my parents for a while because I've bottomed out. Like, there's nothing I can do right now.
Yeah.
It turns out to just be for Christmas, but it really...
They did specifically mention at one point that Sophie has, like, for the past 3 years running, spent Christmas with her family.
Yeah, they brought that up earlier on, and this is something she's now doing on her own, alone. But it's like a reprieve almost from like everything going on for like a week or whatever it is.
You could tell that she's really like, you know, she's away from everything. She's not happy here, but she's at least not thinking of the stress that she's having to walk back to. I don't think we mentioned that Sophie came to visit at one point when she was living with the two guys, and Frances does her absolute damnedest to tell Sophie, like, hey, I know you're dating this guy. I know you're like super into this guy, but break up with him and start dating my roommate. So that way you'll have reason to spend all your time here. And it's like such an inherently selfish plan, but she's like all in on trying to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, I think because again, much like the dance stuff, I feel like the Sophie plotline is almost best covered just sticking to that for a bit, because you've got like the awkwardness of like, okay, she's moved away and they feel kind of distant, and one of the running things throughout the movie is that she starts like only seeing Sophie once in a while, right? So I think the next time she sees her, like it's kind of awkward, you know, she meets the boyfriend or whatever. But the big thing, the time that really it hits about halfway or so throughout the movie is when she comes back from Christmas and she ends up living with Dom from Mr. Robot for a little bit, which does not seem like a happy friendship. In fact, there's a great scene when she's like on her way to move in with her, right? And she's got her suitcase. And she's like, oh, thanks for letting me crash with you for a couple months. It really means a lot. She's like, hey, do you ever like play fight with your friends? And she's like, no, come on, let's play fight. And she's like,
it's like, no, I really don't want to.
I don't want to. So Frances like goes in for like a fake hit a couple of times, and she does come off as unhinged. Like, you can see the other woman just looking like, what have I done agreeing to let this woman into my house? She's a psychopath.
I think it would be one thing if she did the play fighting like one time, and then the character's name is Rachel, but I'll say Dom for your sake. Dom is like, oh geez, what is wrong with you? Stop it. And if she backed off there and was just like kind of humble and was like, sorry, I just, you know, wanted to give it a try, so be it. But she went in for seconds. Like, she went after her again. And I'm like, no, this is the point where you need to separate yourself and call the police, Dom. Please leave.
Yeah. But what this leads to is her having her having dinner with Dom's family, right? So it's like people that Dom knows, and it's like a fancy adult dinner in a sort of rich person's house. And
talking about their apartment in Paris, and other stuff.
Talking about traveling, and this scene was so like triggering to me because the entire time it's really uncomfortable because Frances keeps like interjecting into the conversation, but you can tell that everyone else is like, who is this child who's like who clearly doesn't talk like an adult, who's bringing up things and talking about friends in ways that you don't talk about other adults. It felt so, because she starts like kind of like almost shit talks Sophie a little bit, and like then goes, why am I shit talking my friend Sophie? I love Sophie. But the reason why I wanted to get to this scene is because this is the moment where someone else is like, oh yeah, I mean, it's wild, like, you know, she must be learning Japanese or something. She's like, what do you mean? Why? It's like, oh, like Patch is like her boyfriend. He's getting moved to the Tokyo branch, so they're moving to Japan. And like, again, like even more so than the Christmas thing is cancelled or you're not in the Christmas thing, this was like, she's sitting at the table and you can just feel this devastation. Because it's not just the realization that her best friend that she is longing to be with again is moving country and therefore permanently might be gone, but it's this idea that she's not even close enough to her right now that she even knows about this. She's found this out from some third, fourth, fifth party conversation, and it's this bombshell. So you can really see that on her face. And she was actually saying at the start of this scene she's not drinking, she's trying to not drink. And then when she hears this news, she grabs the bottle of wine and starts pouring. Pours
for herself. Yeah, no, I felt so bad in that scene for her, because it was, again, like you said, just this bombshell where she understands she's being left behind. Not just in the sense of, you know, her friend is moving to Japan, but like her friend is growing up and she's not keeping pace with that. And she wants everything to go back to the way it was before, but it's just a genie that can't be put back in the bottle.
And this is where I did feel a great bit of sympathy, because I think this, while some things in this movie are kind of her fault, there's nothing to stop Sophie from still being friends with her, even with her leading different lives. And I think this feels like it stings, because it's like, yeah, Sophie's kind of just straight up leaving her behind by not even keeping her in the loop. And I get why that hurts. I get why this affects her so much, and I feel like it's understandable. And this is one of the few things where I don't blame Frances for this one. I do think this is just, not that Sophie did something intentionally like mean here necessarily, but just I kind of like feel like this isn't something that she brought on herself here. I mean, maybe in a larger sense you could say, well, maybe she like made Sophie feel like she couldn't be part of the group anymore, she's alienated herself or whatever. You could maybe look at it in a broad way like that. But, I mean, it takes two to tango, and it really feels like Sophie could have kept reaching out to her. And if Frances kept kind of fobbing her off because she didn't want to like, be around the boyfriend or something, yeah, that is on Frances for making it difficult to keep that connection. But this really felt like, oh, no, this stung, and there's no one's coming out of this feeling good about it.
I think that's the rub, is that they keep on saying over and over again that Frances sees her and Sophie as essentially the same person with different hair. Like they like all the same things, they do all the same stuff, they see themselves as essentially the same people, or at least Frances does. Because I think that this is the point where the differences show up. It's the idea that Frances isn't able to grow up, Sophie is. And when she's forced to confront that difference, when she's forced to say, oh, we're not the same like that, that's what kind of drives that wedge between them of, okay, well, how much should Frances be like trying to keep up with Sophie here, and how much should Sophie be coming back for her friend and trying to like pull her up as well?
Yeah, like she could help Frances grow up, and obviously at a certain point she has to be willing to, but like,
right,
it doesn't feel like, from what we see in the movie, that she tried that much. It feels like once the better life, like Frances had a couple of awkward interactions about not liking the boyfriend, and that was kind of seemed to be enough for Sophie to just kind of start to drift.
Well, I don't think it's so much about the boyfriend, though. I feel like it's just they're both the same in that way. I think they're both the same in that they both feel awkward with how they are drifting apart, and they both want the other person to be the one that reaches out.
No, I agree with that. I don't mean it's about the boyfriend. I'm just saying the boyfriend happens to be the thing. But yeah, he's the subject of what the source of the weirdness is, but it's not
right.
You know, yeah, I think because one of the things you were saying there about Sophie's kind of ready to move on and grow up a bit, and she's not. There's a kind of a simple little like sign of this really early on. Like one of the things they do at the end of Their Perfect Day is that they're both smoking on the balcony, or the fire escape or whatever, and there's a scene like the next time they're at the apartment where Frances is smoking at the window, and she says, "Hey, come and be with me. I don't like doing this alone." And Sophie says, "No, I don't want to." And it's just a simple little thing, but it's just that sign of like, oh, she's ready to move on and grow up and not do that. It's just like a simple little thing of like, she still wants to do this thing, Sophie doesn't. And then,
I mean, it could even be simpler than that. The very first time that we were talking about their phones, she has the phone with email. She's a grown-up. She's able to check her stuff like that. She's able to grow up in that way. And Frances is just like, yeah, no, I'll just stick with my flip phone. I don't need it for anything else besides texting boys.
The reason why I like the smoking thing though more is because it's actually Frances saying, "Hey, stay in this place with me," and Sophie making the choice not to. It's that part of it that I like. So yeah, this is a bombshell, and she ends up drinking, and she's basically because this like richer couple who are talking about how great their kids are and all this traveling they've done. They're like, "Oh, you should really go to Paris if you get a chance," and Frances is just awkwardly, "Oh, no anytime soon.
It's not going to be in the budget. Sorry.
I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon." But then after the whole conversation, and because she feels progressively more, because she eventually effectively gets drunk, and the scene that you were alluding to earlier, where this is the scene where she talks about what she wants out of life and out of a partner, and talks about what I want. Because at first she talks about what she wants in a boyfriend, but it kind of like expands to be, this is just what I want in life. It doesn't even matter if it's a boyfriend or like a romantic partner. I want that person that when I look at them across the room at a party, our eyes can meet and we both feel like content. Like we both feel like complete because we've seen each other, kind of thing.
Yeah, she basically describes a sort of situation where we don't even have to be together. Like we don't have to be joined at the hip or whatever like that, but we can just share a glance and know that they're always going to be there, and it's always going to be like their other half sort of thing.
Yeah, and that does come up, obviously, that gets paid off like towards the end where that moment actually happens, which is great. But this kind of is her drunkenly talking about this because she feels that she's losing it, obviously, right? She does not feel right now that she has that. She wants it, but she does not have it. And she mentioned that one of their friend group from college, which is brought up a lot, we don't really get to meet a lot of those other friends, but obviously her and Sophie were in a friend group. She mentions that one of them live in Paris. And at the end of the scene when she's leaving, and she suddenly says, "I'm going, bye-bye," she gets to the door, and she just sort of on a whim says, "You know what? I'm going to Paris this weekend." And like the couple are like, "Oh, do you want to stay at our apartment that's there?" Because they're not there, obviously. And she's like, "Oh, that'd be great." And it's like, wait, why did you just say that? Like, what the hell? Especially since we already know at this point that she's got a meeting on Monday morning with the women at the dance company about what our future there is going to be. So we know she's got an important thing to get back for.
Yes.
And she's going to Paris for 2 days, and when she's asked on the phone, I think it is Sophie who... Was it Sophie? No, maybe it's someone else. Someone asked her on the phone how she's paying for this, and she's like, oh
no, that's... She walks down the street away from the party, and she runs back into Benji, who's with a new girlfriend or something.
That's right.
And she just starts like basically trauma dumping like on them. She plays it off like all cool. She's like, yeah, I'm going to Paris. I'm going to put it all on this credit card I got in the mail. And the girl who like knows nothing about this situation is like, that sounds like a really bad idea. And Francis is just like, I watched the documentaries. I know how bad.
Here's the thing. My favorite funny moment of the whole movie is in this scene, because Frances is like going on and on about this trip to Paris. And then she's like, I'm going for 2 days. And the girl who's with Benji, who clearly is like 18, 19, she's this young college student, right? She looks sort of doughy-eyed or whatever. She's like, oh, why only 2 days? And she's like, oh, I have to get back in Monday for a meeting with Carol. And the girl just immediately deadpan goes, I don't know you. Yeah. Because clearly she won't know who Carol is and what that sentence means.
It's not even like mean either. She's just like, as if she's gently reminding Frances of like, we don't know each other.
Yeah, that
your names mean nothing to me.
But I think obviously it's pointing out that Frances is speaking like she doesn't care that this person doesn't know who I'm talking about or what's going on. She's so wrapped up in her own shit. But obviously this scene, I wasn't sure where that I was going to feel this scene placed. Obviously by the end, I think it is implied that, maybe a positive step for both her and Benji at the end is that maybe they will start dating, maybe they will go down that path. It's kind of implied that they might at the end. But this scene kind of felt like, even Benji's kind of moved on to someone. Like she's been gone out of their apartment for like a month or two now, and he's got a young girlfriend by the looks of it, and they still got chemistry. He bounces off of her in this scene just as much as he has been.
I mean, he literally says like, "Oh yeah, this is Frances. We were kind of married for a while."
Yeah, he even jokes. To which the girl just sort of goes, "Oh, cool." Which, to be fair, she takes the joke. She takes it on her chin. She doesn't get weird, but. It really sets up this idea of like, maybe even like someone else in her life has moved on past where she is now. Like he's like doing other stuff. And that's not really the case, but you can tell like from her perspective in this scene running into him that it might feel that way. It's like, he's found someone and I'm just off,
Yeah, especially this is right after the party where she feels more alone than ever because Sophie's clearly more distant. Speaking of Sophie though, there's one scene that happens somewhere in the middle here. I don't know where, but I need to talk about it. And that is meeting up at the bar after, and you know where it is? It's after her dance where she's told that she's not going to be in the Christmas show. She meets up with Sophie downstairs. Sophie brought along her boyfriend, Patch. And Frances is like, all right, let's go to the bar.
One thing here. Patch's introduction. At the start of the movie, when they're talking about like potential boyfriends or something, I think she's joking about her current boyfriend at the moment. Sophie's current boyfriend. I don't know if it was Patch at that time or if she met Patch after that.
I think it was Patch,
right?
yeah.
But they're basically, she says something like, he's always coming on her face.
He's only able to like come on his face or come on her face or something like that. Yeah.
I just rephrased that halfway through the sentence because I was about to say it in the first person. I went, you know what? I don't want a sound clip of me saying that on the internet, so I'm rephrasing it. Right?
Sorry, sound clip of what, Pete? Let me just get the timestamp.
No, not happening.
Okay.
And Francis makes a joke. Yeah, I bet he's the type of guy that goes, "Oh, I need to take a leak," and then says, "Oh, and I bet he has a lot of baseball caps too." And I laugh so hard because when the first time we meet Patch, and it's after this dance show where she comes out and meets Sophie, Patch walks into scene, he's wearing a cap, he says, "Oh, before we go, I got to take a leak," and he walks off. And I let out such a hearty chuckle because it was such a good payoff to that earlier conversation about him.
It is. It's very nice how they played that off.
Yeah, it's very good. But they go for what's supposed to be a quick drink because they've got like a plane to catch the next morning. But Francis gets shit-faced and tries to...
on behalf of the table, orders the most expensive vodka and then immediately gets up and goes to the bathroom with Sophie and just tells Patch, like, you got the money thing, right? All right, bye.
and takes the bottle. Takes the bottle with her as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe add. So, yeah, that really... Yeah, it really shows her... This is kind of like the scene where Sophie sees her at her worst and probably is what encourages her to think, okay, we're not good right now. Like, I tried to, like, come and do a nice social thing with her and my boyfriend, and it kind of broke down. She's clearly in a rough place.
Well, yeah, that's because she goes to the bathroom with Sophie, and she basically says, like, look, you don't love Patch. Like, you don't want to be with him. Stop pretending like you do. And Sophie's like, I do, though. I want to be with him. This is clearly something I want. And drunkenly, she just gets, like, more and more on it, being like, no, I know you. Like, I know who you are. We're the same person. You don't love him. And this is where it finally drives that wedge, where Sophie's basically forced to admit, no, you don't know who I am anymore. Yeah, you don't know the kind of person I've grown into.
Yeah, there's this sense of denial, for sure, coming into it.
The scene ends on this bang. Like, Sophie goes to leave the bathroom, and Frances just, like, slams her hands on the wall next to Sophie, and it seems like she's not going to let her leave. But then we cut to outside the bathroom. Sophie's telling Patch that they got to go. Frances tells him, no, you guys sit down. I'm going to leave. And by the way, I'm going on a fun vacation, so you might not be able to call me, so don't even bother trying. And she takes the vodka and goes home.
Which, to be fair, does somewhat justify why she hadn't heard about the whole Japan thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Because basically she's distanced herself there and nobody was willing to make the first mending step.
Yeah, so... Yeah, I mean, it puts them in a rough place. But she goes on this trip to Paris, and it's the most depressing, sad trip to Paris anyone's ever had. Because she's on her own. Like, she gets off the plane and she goes to the apartment, and there's a key under the mat, and she she gets in, and it seems like a nice balcony and whatever. But as she's on her way, she makes a phone call or she leaves a message for her friend that lives in Paris, right? And she's like, "Hey, I'm in Paris for a couple days. We should get together." And you get the feeling that the rest of the trip, she's waiting for a response from this one friend. And it's almost like she's reaching out to someone else in the friend group. It's like, okay, the relationship with Sophie's falling apart. Maybe I can reach out to this other girl that I know in Paris. Maybe I can, like, form a bond there and feel not so alone. But then she spends so much time. This is where she goes to see Puss in Boots. And she went to Paris to see Puss in Boots.
As one does. True cinema was born in Paris.
And, you know, there's just a lot of her sitting on her own at cafes. Like, the song that's playing here, like, keeps coming back in. Like, it'll stop for, like, she has a little scene where she's got a phone call or something. The big thing, though, is that eventually Sophie calls her and doesn't even know she's in Paris, but she's like, hey, here's the thing. I'm going to Japan with, you know. So she did eventually tell her. Like, she did make, like, so... Frances didn't prompt this phone call. She didn't prompt her telling her about Japan. And obviously, she's finding out much later than she should have, given what the relationship is supposed to be. But Sophie did reach out. Sophie did eventually say, okay, I have to tell her about Paris, or about Japan. And she does. She tells her about it and says, oh, I'm moving there, and we've got like a going away party kind of thing that's happening tonight. You should come. I want to invite you. She's, you know, extending her hand. And Frances like, yeah, I can't come. And Sophie thinks she's just lying. So, no, I'm being serious. I can't come. I literally cannot make it in time. Like,
but that's the thing, is that she's unwilling to admit why she can't. Like, she's unwilling to say, on a whim, I just took a trip to Paris. Because by this point in her trip, she realizes just how stupid of a decision that was.
I almost feel as well the decision to go to Paris does link back to that moment she said, I'm going to be on a trip. It's like almost like that rekindled when she found out everything about Sophie at the dinner party, And that kind of like re-inspired this idea, along with, of course, the couple talking about Paris and her feeling like I'm a poor soul who can't go on trips like that. Oh no, sod it, I'm going to prove I can. I'm going to Paris for the weekend. And she ends up here, and it actually stops her from building that bridge with Sophie when she's given the chance to.
Yeah, it's this idea that she hears Sophie's going to Japan, and she's like, oh, that's what grown-ups do? Grown-ups go to foreign countries? All right, I'll go to a foreign country. And it's completely missing the point that she's moving to this foreign country because it's Patch's job. Like, that's why she's doing it. It's not just on a whim, drop everything and go. If anything, on a whim trips are the most, like, immature thing. It's the ones that don't require any sort of forethought or effort like that.
Yeah, it's and the funny thing is, though, is this phone call does show their chemistry again. It does show why they're friends. They sort of joke a little bit about her doing a blog in Japan, which is kind of referenced later. But she, asked about what's going on with Frances, and this is where I start to really feel sad for her. Not only does this feel like a really lonely trip, where she effectively went to Paris for 2 days and did nothing but like sat on her own and stay in an apartment, and it's just a really pathetic trip. But when she's asked like how things are going, she's like, oh yeah, things are great. She has to lie. She can't pretend. She can't just be honest and say things aren't so hot. And I think that's something that is a real problem with people, and it's something I myself have struggled with, is like just admitting when I'm not that great. And I think it's because there are some people who are always saying things are bad, and that is the opposite problem, where you're just like a bummer for everyone, because you just never stop complaining. But there is definitely a healthy place in the middle where you can find it. But
again, it's that idea of everyone has their outward thing. Everyone has a side of them that they show to the world and a side of them they keep private. And it's this idea that they don't have the emotional closeness that they need right now to show that raw, tender side. They need to be able to have that. And we do get that later on, but right now they're forced to just play pretend and like nice and stuff, because they don't know how close they can really be. They feel more distant than they are.
I think there's two kinds of people. There's people who, like, even with people who are close to them, like, they struggle to admit when they're not feeling good emotionally. And then there's people, and this is, I think, the people who are a bummer for everyone, who will start telling anyone who will listen that things aren't going well. Right. And I'm sure we've all met people like that. And they are annoying. They are. Like, people who, like, you're not friends with, you're just, like, you've bumped into them and you're just been introduced, and immediately they start complaining about how bad their life is. And it's like there's certain people you talk to about this, and then there's like people you barely know that you don't. There's the casual people who you do just pretend everything's okay with because it's polite. And there's the other people. And
look, when you walk into like work and the security guard says, "How you doing?" you respond with, "Fine, and you." You don't respond with, "Jesus, Frank, let me tell you." You
don't fall to your knees and start crying into their leg like, "Oh, it's so hard."
Yeah, pretty much. I do want to say, you said there are two types of people. I'd hope there's a third type of healthy.
Oh yeah, okay, yes, okay. Yeah. What I meant to say is there's two extremes.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
obviously, there's a lot of people in the middle between those two extremes, to varying degrees. But I think that really sold this idea to me, that she just is, like, she cannot admit, even to the and this is the sad part, but this it's one thing with the dinner table scene where she clearly doesn't know these people that well. Of course, she has to make nice and say, "Oh, everything's great," and pretend that, "Oh yeah, I'm a dancer, yeah, and I'm hoping to get promoted soon. It's going places." But Sophie's the person in her life that she's supposed to be able to admit, "No, I don't think it's looking good. It seems like things aren't going well. We've got this meeting on Monday. I'm hopeful, but honestly, the vibes haven't been great. I've been going through a rough time. I've been really lonely." This is the person that she's supposed to be able to say this to, and she can't, because from her perspective, oh, Sophie's doing great. She's moving to a new country with a new boyfriend who's being successful, and I can't compete with that. I can't burden her, like, and it's that failure to give that to her.
I mean, honestly, the last line of the phone call is what really sells where she thinks they're at right now, is that she says, "Look, I have something I need to tell you, but I know I don't want to put any pressure on you if you don't feel the same way." And she says, "I love you, Sophie," and then hangs up. And it's that idea of, like, she didn't think, or at least she didn't know for sure, that Sophie would feel the same way for her. And obviously it's like a platonic love. It's not like a romantic thing. But
yeah. I think it's nice to think that she's being silly here, and that Sophie, of course, would just say it back without thinking about it, but she actually is at a place where she's not sure if she would. And maybe that's just all insecurities. It doesn't even necessarily need to be said that there's any truth to it, but clearly that's how she feels in the moment. And then we get the sad plane ride home. It's like, okay, that was your trip.
Well, no, then we get the punchline to the whole thing. Is that on the car ride back from the airport, she gets a call from the friend in Paris saying, hey, we just got your messages, swing by tonight.
And not only that, like, we just got your messages, and by the way, this guy just got divorced, and I think he'd be perfect for you. Oh, this timing's great. There was that line, that timing is perfect.
Yeah,
that was the line.
Is perfect. It's like, oh, God.
Yeah. So she basically goes straight from the airport to the meeting with Carol from the dance company. And she's like,
her name's not actually Carol.
It was something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Colleen, that's what it was. I knew it was something close to it. And, you know, Colleen's like, wait, you just got back from, we could have pushed the meeting. Like, I almost cancelled it myself. It wasn't even that, like, important that it was today.
You see that on Francis's face of just like, oh, right, adult people can change meetings. I completely forgot that was the thing.
But I think it's that, but I think it also sells this idea that Francis thought this was an important meeting, and Colleen's like, oh no, this is like just a casual, I'll get to it kind of thing, you know? And she's like, okay, Debbie, who works in the admin, like, she's leaving because she's pregnant, she's moving on with her new husband or whatever, blah, 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 blah. That position's open, it'd be a steady job. Like, do you want it? And Francis is like offended, like, I'm a dancer.
Oh yeah. It's not even that she's offended like I'm a dancer. She's basically like, this is the job you want to offer me? Like, it's not even so much that she feels that she's a dancer. It's so much that, like, she came into this expecting one thing and then got completely blindsided by, like, no, we want you to sit behind a desk.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that Colleen even says, like, I know it's not like the dream thing for you, but it's a steady job, and because you're still working here, you can still use the dance floors when they're free. You can still, like, maybe do, like, choreography and do other, like, you know, progress your dance career while you're working here. It's a good opportunity in that sense. And she obviously just didn't expect that. And this is where my heart sank, is she lies and says, oh, I've got like a good opportunity. Like, I think I'm almost got a dance job somewhere else. I'll still be dancing, just not here. And I'm like, why you, like, Francis, this is the moment where you're doing this to yourself. This is where you just killed a good opportunity.
But that's the thing. She can't admit to herself the dream is over. She can't move on and say, I'm not going to be able to do this the way I want to do this. So she just has to keep trucking.
So, yeah, and it's like, there's a sort of harsh cut after this where it, like, comes up with a new address, and it's like Poughkeepsie, New York. And I'm like, what
I think it's... Sorry, no, there's... After this address, it pops up with another one, and it's just a P.O. box. Like, it's not even an actual address. And that's what made my heart sink. I was just like, oh, man.
But it's like Poughkeepsie, and I'm like, we're going to find that she did get, like, a job somewhere else? And it turns out she's back where her college is. This is where she went to college. And she got, like, free room and board at the old dorms because she offered to, like, work for, like, one of the professors, like, doing, like helping with some of the dance stuff. Like, but it's not like she's dancing. She's doing, like... I don't know. It's just like it's like the volunteer work the students do, but she's like there to kind of like be the adult that's doing it.
She's an RA. She's a room advisor. So she basically stays in the dorms, and anytime a student needs like help or assistance or something from like an adult, she's there. Yeah,
she's like handing out flyers on like the day that they all arrive with like a not a freshman. It wouldn't be because the freshman will be the new people, but like with the junior or whatever as the sophomore.
Right.
And she's like, oh, I thought only students could do this job. Yeah, I'm glad you explained that. I didn't know what an RA was, so thank you.
It's essentially just there's an older person, they get a little bit of a pay, and of course they get to stay in the dorms.
So, yeah, she's doing that, and it's just kind of like, this is where she is, and she's not admitting that like where she is. I mean, she's kind of open with her parents to an extent, which I guess makes sense, because her parents would be the, you know, like...
Yeah.
Like, she's not necessarily being honest about how she feels about it. Don't get me wrong. She's not opening up in that way. But the parents at least know where she is and that she is doing this, where anyone else she speaks to, she'll lie to, which obviously leads to the fact that Sophie miraculously ends up at, like, a function at the college a little bit later on.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's not much the sequence after this, but she essentially has to take a job as a waiter. And she keeps on saying, I'm not a waiter, I pour. That's her whole thing. She pours drinks. And then there's a function going on where there is a super, like, I forget exactly what it is.
It's a former student who's like a senator or something.
Yeah, it's like a senator or a congressman or something.
Which, by the way, she's a total like cougar, because she's like going up to like the 18-year-old students and she just starts making out with one of them in the background at one point. I'm like, okay, I guess that's who this character is.
Yeah, why not? But no, she's told, you got to follow this lady around. Anytime her wine glass is empty, you just fill it back up again. Make sure she doesn't want for anything. And as she's following this lady around, she hears a couple arguing across the room, and it's Sophie and Patch, who are here because there was an auction going on. That's the whole big event going on. And Sophie is just blatantly drunk and like not in a good place, to the point where she...
Yeah, it's showing, despite all the differences in where they are in their life, that this is just like what Frances was at the dinner party. This is her. Right. There's something going on in her life, and she can't handle it, and she's gotten drunk to deal with it, and she's fighting with her fiancé, we find out here. And that's when Frances reveals herself, because she's hiding. This is actually quite funny. She's like she's pouring drinks, but she's kind of hunched over and doing it to try and like not be visible. But then when they say they're married or they're getting married, she like pops up and goes, "You're engaged!" Like,
whole crowd goes silent.
But it leads to this whole thing where like her and the boyfriend keep fighting throughout the night. There's a whole scene where they're leaving that night and they're going to drive Sophie home to where she's living. And like Frances, or Sophie rather, is just so drunk, and she's just fighting with Patch the entire time. She's like putting her feet up on the dashboard. He's yelling at her. At one point, Patch made me laugh because the way he yells out, "Frances, how do you get to your dorm?" Like,
yeah, it's like, "Frances, where do you live?" And she's like, "Chuggins." He's like, "Is that a dorm?" "Yes." He slams the door. But how the fuck do you get the door?
But I love at the end of it though, like when he's dropping her off, and like Sophie's still drunk, and she's like, she doesn't even like you, Patch. And she's like, "That's not true. I like you, Patch." And Patch just kind of quietly goes, "I like you too, Frances," before he drives off. But it's this thing where Sophie ends up spending the night with Frances, and
she drives back over afterwards, knocking on the door,
and she's very drunk, and it's basically this like rekindling of like, it replays the moment from the start of the movie where they were falling asleep together, and it does this little interesting thing actually where she uses a little trick that Benji taught her about, like, if you've got the spins, then lie flat on your back and put one foot on the floor. And she tells that to Sophie, and I kind of took that as a little sign that in some way she is learning. Like she's taking something in, and she's kind of like passing it back on. It feels like there's a little glimmer of hope there.
That's the thing that I think this scene does well, is that this is the turning point, both in Sophie's plot and Frances's plot, is that Frances sees for the first time that all the people who were only presenting their best sides, that it's not the whole story. She sees Sophie breaking down and her saying, like, "I'm not happy. When we were in Japan, I had a miscarriage, and like I'm so upset." And she keeps on saying,
she opens up big here.
Yeah,
and
she basically just keeps saying, like, "I'm not happy, and I want things to go back to the way they were before. I'm gonna leave Patch, and I'm gonna move back to New York, and like we can just pick right back up again."
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this is she's really drunk when she's saying this, right? And she's saying, "Yeah, I'll move back and we can be best friends again." And she falls asleep as she's saying this. And Frances has got this big smile on her face the whole time. She wants this to all be true. But of course, as she's leaving a note for her in the morning, Frances basically... It's almost like a couple that broke up but had a one-night stand later, and she's doing the quiet walk of shame, but she just leaves a note to say bye. But she says, "Thanks for being nice to me last night. I don't remember if you were, but I assume you were." And it's like, oh, she doesn't remember saying any of those things. But Frances heard all these like desires of wanting things to go back to the way she wants them to go back to as well. And there's this big dramatic moment where Frances wakes up right after she leaves and runs out after her in her, like, pajamas basically. And the car's too far gone, but she's running after it, screaming, "Sophie, Sophie!" And it's very much, again, like a romantic movie where the lover's running out to try and like catch them before they leave. And I think this is the moment where she has this realization that those first of all, those statements last night were not like a sober, in earnest, like, declaration of intent, right? It was just the mumblings because she's drunk,
essentially.
Yeah. And clearly, I mean, I think the end of the movie implies that they maybe did move back to New York, but she's clearly still with Patch. He's still, or just Patch, I should say. He's still there.
They got fully married according to one of the characters.
That's right. You're right. Yeah. So they've progressed. Like, even though they've had a rough patch, clearly it's led to something. And maybe the rough patch was just because she wasn't happy living in a different country. Maybe they've reconciled that. He's maybe she's said that to him. He now understands it. He's like, okay, I want to be with you. Let's move back to New York, whatever. It
also entirely could have just been the thing of, like, we didn't get any sort of timing on when the miscarriage happened. She might have been just, like, depressed because of that happening, because that could have been something she wanted.
There's so many specifics here we could speculate on. It doesn't really matter ultimately too much. It's just the idea that it's, this wasn't the end of her marriage. This was just her venting to a best friend.
Yeah. And then the other thing with that scene, though, of like her, as you said, she's picking up on stuff.
I think I think the main thing for me is when she's running out after her, I think she realizes how ridiculous this is. I think she realizes what she's doing, and that I'm relying too much. I'm too tied to this person, like, in the way that I am, and I have to, like, make a change, because it cuts straight from here to her having made a change to take the job with Colleen. Right? She's taken the office job.
Well, before you get to that, I do want to counter that point. I didn't quite get the idea that she sees how ridiculous this is, because she's always been doing these, like, big bombastic things. Like, again, she gets into very manic phases. That's not something that is new for this character. I think what happens is, because of Sophie's opening up, because of showing that vulnerability, that idea that you're never going to have everything 100% together. There's always going to be this underlying current of just making it up as you go. Being an adult isn't something where it is this, you suddenly know everything you need to know, and you just know how to pay taxes and do all that other stuff, and, like, how to adult. It's just taking the things and having the initiative to move forward with them. And I think that's what her conversation with Sophie kind of sobers up in her, is that, like, again, with that idea that she told Sophie the best way to, like, not throw up while in bed is laying back with the foot on the floor. She's picked up all these things over the course of her life, and she's just now like, all right, well, I guess all I need is the initiative. And so she takes that first step, and she finds out it's easier than she honestly expected it to be.
No, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with any of that. I just think that conversation does awaken that in her, and I think, but I think it's like this last grasp of, like, that night, hearing her say those things, racing after her the next morning, and then realizing, oh wait, I'm racing after her like this. And I think she knows she does ridiculous things. I think she comments on it often. She talks about how she's kind of, like, weird and does these things. And there's a scene earlier on at the start of the movie where she's, like, leaning over the edge of the subway platform to piss on the tracks. Yeah, that's literally a scene in this movie. And Sophie's laughing at it, but this is obviously before everything changes. Here, I feel like it's almost kind of like someone realizing that they've hit the bottom of the barrel or whatever, right? It's like
it's Robert Downey Jr.'s Burger King moment.
Kinda, but it's just this idea, like, realizing, like, maybe she's already partly had the realization, but I think she still chases after as this one last grasp of, like, and then realizing, oh no, that time to be just that is over. Maybe I actually have to make an adult decision now. And smash cut, she has the job, and she is doing choreography. I mean, the movie effectively ends with her opening a show with all these dancers, but she's not a dancer herself. She's not in the performance. She's the one who's put it together, though, while she's also doing this job with Colleen, and seems to be having a good time doing that. And it's when she's at, like, the little after mingling session at this performance where every character basically she's interacted with, for the most part, is here. Benji's there, Adam Driver's there with a girl, Sophie's there with her husband now. Like, all the major characters in her life are there, and she kind of, like, talks to a bunch of them. And it's when Colleen's talking to her about how good the dance was that she has that moment where she looks over at Sophie. Like, she talks to a lot of the others. She talks to Benji for a minute. She doesn't talk to Sophie in this scene. She just has the moment she described earlier on. She doesn't have to talk to Sophie. She just has to look over and, like, make eye contact, and she has that moment, and that's effectively it's not the final scene of the movie, but it's I would say it's the climax of the emotional, like, ride that we've been on with the characters.
It was basically saying, like, okay, in terms of growing to be an adult, I think that the final scene is showing that final part of the journey. But in terms of her emotional reliance on Sophie as this, like, crutch to the olden days, to her youth, she's finally managed to take that in a mature direction and say, we still have each other, but it's in a more better for us kind of way.
She basically got, like, of all the things she said she's wanted throughout this movie, she got the one thing she said was the most important. She got this person in her life that she can just look at across the room and just feel comforted by, and it be mutual, and then that's it. And like I said, she also has like a little moment with Benji where he's like, oh, by the way, when I said undateable this time, I meant me, because I'm not with anyone. Like, I'm making it clear that I'm single. Are you undateable right now? And she's like, yeah, I'm single. And it just leaves it there. It doesn't go into it as if, oh, they're actually going to get together. But it's just like, hey, there might be like a well-matched pairing between these two that might form out of this if they're willing to go. And it seems like she might, because it feels like she has at least grown up a little bit by this point.
That's the thing. I think that they spend so much time in this movie saying how she's undateable, and they keep on listing off this stuff that is just her being like dorky and a little bit weird. It's not anything of like, oh, I like to, you know, cut off men's genitals in their sleep or anything like that, because that would be actually undateable.
I think it's more concerning that you went straight to that, but okay.
I mean, yeah, fair enough. But no, I think that hitting this mature point now is them both kind of realizing that, like, yeah, no, that's not really undateable. That's just us growing up, you know? That's us being kids. And now we're growing up, we're older, and maybe we can give this a try. Yeah,
like a real relationship, effectively. So, yeah, I mean, it leaves it off in a hopeful moment for that. And the final part of the movie, after all these different addresses and P.O. boxes and all these things we've seen her living, you know, at various locations throughout the movie, she seems to have moved into an apartment. We see her, like, you know, unpacking. And the final part of the movie, which sort of gives you the double meaning of the title. Because I think up until this part of the movie, I was thinking the title was like, okay, her name's Frances, obviously. But she does kind of laugh a lot of things off. And I think that's what the title's getting at. She kind of just sort of immaturely will just sort of say, ha, whatever, to a lot of things.
Like Frances, comma, ha.
Yeah. But at the end of the movie, she's making her little label or name for her postbox in the foyer of the apartment building, and it won't fit. Her name's too long, so she has to fold over the last part, and it just says Frances Ha, which is funny for the title of the movie. Obviously, any real person would shorten the first name, because if someone's sending you mail, the last name is more important. But, you know, who am I to...
whatever.
She's still got growing up to do, is all I'm saying, okay? There's still one little thing there needs improving.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Dear. But yeah, so yeah. And it's funny, yes, we did not talk a lot about dancing. She does talk about it a lot. She's constantly talking about it's funny because I would compare it, out of anything, the one I compare it to the most, maybe out of what the dance movies, is maybe Flashdance, only in the idea that it's kind of like the more like sad, like companion piece where it's a little bit later and she's not made it, and she's just refusing to accept she's not made it. But it's, you know, that's the idea of like, oh, I'm hoping to make it someday, and she keeps bringing it up. But it has that kind of like failed artist kind of vibe to it, where it keeps being like, oh, I'm working on projects. I've got films, working along. I've got several scripts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Flashdance was the closest in terms of someone who didn't really, I mean, honestly, out of all the dance movies we did, almost all of them had a romantic undertone, which Flashdance is one of the few that it did have a romantic plot to it, but I think the central core focus of it was much more a coming of age of like discovering who you are.
This film is, of course, much more nuanced, in part because it doesn't have just a straight romantic element. There is obviously how she views romance, both for herself and for the people around her, that does play a big part of her character, but it's more about how like she is as a person and how she reacts to those things and how she interacts with them. That's what it's about. It's not about her finding the love of her life necessarily.
Yeah, no. Honestly, I feel there was a brief part when she was living with the two guys where she was talking so much with Benji and they kept on like flirting and doing that so much that I thought it was kind of going to go down that path. And I'm relieved that it didn't. But I also kind of like that it did get closure at the end, where it's like, no, they were good for each other. We can come back to that.
No, there was genuine chemistry. It makes sense to tease that for like a potential like after the movie kind of thing. But yeah. I mean, honestly, it's a really solid drama. The performance from Greta Gerwig, it's kind of funny that she's moved on to directing and not really being in the movies as much,
right?
But because she is a good director, for sure. But yeah, she is so good in this as an actor, and obviously co-wrote the script as well, that it's like, oh, it'd almost be a shame if she ever acts again, like to that same extent. I mean, I'm sure she's been in stuff recently, but
yeah, I'm just looking through her stuff here.
She's probably been very busy, you know, making Barbies and whatnot.
Yeah, her most recent thing was I don't know how big of a role it was, but there was the movie White Noise, which is another
Noah Baumbach movie, yeah.
She played Babette, which is second credited, so I assume that it is actually pretty easy. Starring opposite Adam Driver, actually. So
I think what's funny is that a lot of Noah Baumbach, and even a lot of her movies outside of Barbie, which is a big sort of blockbustery type movie, they tend to be these smaller indie films, which will be made relatively quickly. So it's not surprising that maybe she does appear in a lot of those like small indie productions, but then, you know, directs bigger movies.
Right.
Like, I could see that being kind of like how the career pans out. But
yeah, I mean, I'm happy that she made the jump over to directing, but honestly, with her having the co-writing credit on this, I think that she's always had talent behind this camera as well. It's never been something where she started as an actress. She started on both, and she just kind of leaned more into one direction.
I think what's interesting about it is that I think obviously Noah Baumbach's very good with like character drama in general, but I think her being a co-writer on this, I think you can really feel her putting. I'm not saying it's like, maybe there is some elements of her real life that have inspired like how this character is, and that's why it feels so genuine, and you know her performance is so natural at it. But it definitely feels like her perspective in building this character really helped it feel very authentic. You know, not that a guy can't write a really convincing female character, they can, but like it feels very much like she had a big creative voice in this character, and that feels like it's a really big part of the movie.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you're able to write your own character, it's going to come out sounding as your voice. It's going to come out sounding much more natural than if somebody else were to put words in your mouth.
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously that helps the performance quite a bit, but yeah, very, very good. So, yeah, it's just one of those things where I when I was picking the movies for dance movie season, and I just searched, you know, movies that are about dancing or primarily surrounding the topic.
I guess, yeah.
This came up on the list, and I went, oh, I didn't know this was dance related. And I thought, you know what, we're doing so many of these 80s, you know, mainstream dance movies. I thought, oh, this is a nice, different pick, just to break up the flow a little bit and do something a little bit more, I guess, serious, but not, obviously it's definitely got a sort of comedic kind of underscore to it, but it's definitely very smart in how it tells its story and its characters. So
yeah, I mean, I would say that this possibly might be like the most polar opposite movie, just looking at this season, to like Breakin'. Like Breakin' just felt so shallow and so just like, yeah, let's cash in on a dance craze. Whereas this one's like, no, we got a story to tell and we're barely even going to reference dancing.
Oh, this isn't cashing in on anything.
Nah.
Unless you want to argue that them mentioning Puss in Boots exists as a cash in, but I don't think it is.
I'd love to see Puss in Boots like starting box office progression is like super low, and then this movie comes out like 3 weeks in and it just skyrockets up for a day. Actually,
on that moment, it does kind of tie into an earlier conversation where Benji says, hey, let's go and see a movie today, which is actually even that entire sequence, because it was basically the breakfast scene with the girl who was like with Adam Driver. There was even a funny cut lead into that, because she's like, because they say, hey, we're going to make these big fancy bagels with eggs in them. Do you want one? She's like, oh, no, I can't. I've got chores to do today. Smash cut to her biting into this giant bagel.
Yeah.
And then she's like, oh, no, I can't go to a movie. Like, I've already wasted half the day. I need to do stuff today. So this is the day where I get all my stuff done. And they end up not doing anything. They just sit around in the house watching a movie. But one of the big talking points is that, hey, let's go and see a movie. And she's like, oh, movies are expensive now. And like she doesn't want to do it. So I almost kind of took like her going to see a movie in Paris is like, this is so depressing. The one treat she's going to give herself is that I'll go see a movie. I don't usually let myself see a movie. This is like, I can give myself this.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely took it that way. I also took it in the other way of like, when you're traveling abroad, you want to do things that you can't do when you're normally at home. You want to see the sights, you want to do whatever. The most depressing thing I could think of doing abroad is seeing an American-made movie.
Oh, sure.
Like, especially something as super cash-grabbing and stupid as DreamWorks' Puss in Boots, you know?
I think my concern would be making sure I see the one that's subtitled in French and not the one that's dubbed in French, because the one that's dubbed in French, I mean, like, you can't... you're screwed. You've just ruined it.
To be fair, I kind of want to see just a quick little cutaway of her saying, like, what time did Puss in Boots starts? And then it goes in, and the whole movie is just dubbed in French, and she's like, I don't understand anything that's happening.
Oh, dear. So, yeah, solid movie. This was on my to-watch list for a long time, because it had some, it popped up in some best-of lists, and, things like that. But hey, I guess we're at that point where we're going to rate the film. What are you giving it, David?
I mean, I do feel like I've got more of a handle on what I liked about it. I think that it is a very solid character piece. It does do a very good job of building up Frances and showing us, here's this girl. She's not yet ready to grow up. She's got a whole lot of like manic tendencies to her. She's very impulsive in a lot of things she do, but like we're endeared to her. We want to see her succeed. And over the course of this movie, I think it does a good job of showing the process of how someone grows up. It isn't a straight path of like A to B to C. It's a very winding thing, and you got to learn some hard lessons along the way. I mean, I know personally, my first apartment that I moved out of my parents' place with, it was a disaster. Like, it was the worst roommate situation available. And that's a lesson I learned. And I took that on as I moved on. And now, hitting 30, I feel like I've become an adult in many ways. Ignore the shelves of comic books in the background here. But yeah, no, I really feel for the character. I think it's very well shot, very well written. It's labeled on here as a drama/comedy. And I think that is the most fair I've ever seen a movie described that way. Usually I feel like most movies come down one side or the other. This one does feel like it really straddles that, where some scenes are hilarious, other scenes, it just punches you in the gut. All that said, I think I'm going to come down at a rating of... I'm going to give it an 8.5. I want to give it a really high mark. I just don't feel like it's quite at that 9 level, but this is definitely something that I would recommend to people, especially if they enjoyed things like Barbie and such, and be like, hey, look, here's the writer on that doing another sort of story about figuring out who you are as a person.
Yeah, it's very good. I think 8.5 was about where I was thinking as well. It's it really, like, I would definitely say it's a drama first because of the amount of just like how well it like studies its character to me. Like, no matter how funny it might be, which it absolutely is at times, it really gets you into that character's head space. And much like something like to go with a very different coming of age movie, something like 8th Grade, which I also think is fantastic and maybe even a little bit better, but that's like that's someone who's like 12 going through changes, but it does the same thing where you're so in her head, and she's more innocent because she's 12, and she's not like she should have learned harsher lessons by now. She's still just 12, but she's in all these positions where you sort of feel sympathy, and you get anxiety watching that movie. And I think this movie does feel like a sort of like a different stage of life version of that kind of story. Yeah, and I really like it. So I'm going to go 8.5 as well. It might possibly go up on a rewatch potentially down the line. But it's very good. And it did remind me that I do like Noah Baumbach's movies. At least 2 out of the 3 I've seen, I've really enjoyed. So, yeah. I
mean, majority. That's more than most directors can say.
For sure. So, there you go. That is our thoughts on Frances Ha.
Jumping in, does it make the cut?
I think it does. I think it happily makes the cut.
Yeah. I hesitate to put it at a cut above. I don't think it quite does enough like masterful things to get there, but I do think that it is a super solid film in its own right.
Yeah. I'm happy with makes the cut for this one. Okay. And probably the best movie we've watched during dance movie season.
I'm not gonna argue it. You're right. Yeah.
Oh, the one that I picked that's the least dance movie is the best one. That's funny, that.
Okay, well, here's the thing. You also picked Climax, and I was scared.
No, I put that in a vote. The patrons picked Climax.
All right, well, you picked it for the vote.
Yeah, just because it was different.
I'll give you that.
So yes, that is Frances Ha. Next time on the show, we'll be wrapping up dance movie season with Saturday Night Fever, which is perhaps the most famous dance movie title of all time. So
it had to be.
There's a reason why we started with Dirty Dancing and we're ending with Saturday Night Fever. Those are the two most famous titles, I think, out of the whole bunch. So that is what's coming next week, and then there will be a 1 week gap before we start our next season, which is 90s disaster season. Now, I wouldn't have another disaster movie season so close to the previous one we did. However, Twisters is coming out, and that's a really good reason to do an 80s disaster movie season that ends with Twisters, so we can do Twisters right after. So that's coming after dance movie season, so look forward to that. But yeah, like I said at the start, you can support us at Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. I am a struggling artist, as it were. You could help me struggle less by going to Patreon, and you can get bonus shows from me and David, such as Extra Reels, where we review some of the worst movies of all time. Sometimes they're so bad they're great, but not always. So it's
most. At a certain point, you got to start saying most of the time.
And we also do the Criterion Cut, which is this is a movie that could have been on that show because this is in the Criterion collection, but
I'm in the jacket.
Francis Ha is a part of the Criterion collection, and that is a collection of movies that are sort of prestigious. They come out from the label Criterion. So there you go. I said that really weird because I sort of lost where my sentence was going. But no worries. You can get those bonus shows. Plus, there's a bonus streams after midnight episode if you like the horror movie podcast that I do with Tim. So check out that. So yeah, a bunch of things to be looking at and whatnot. So thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies. And if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity, which you can have in Paris when you're seeing Puss in Boots.